Okay, all right. So just to recap, this chapter 11, is really dedicated to understanding the two lower categories of the 5 categories of human beings that the author of the Tanya speaks about here. The 2 lower ones are the category of the incomplete Rasha and the complete Rasha, the incomplete wicked person and the complete wicked person. Now, he just presented a very powerful idea here, and that's really where we left off on page 272, about how the greater a person is, or the higher that person's level is, the more sensitive he or she is to evil. And therefore, the less evil can penetrate that person's life, because again, he or she is so sensitive to evil on a higher level. The example, maybe it's a bad one, but the example we brought was the example of going on a diet for 30 days, if you recall, then having pizza afterward. Usually the person would vomit the pizza because now his body is healthy. Same here. When we're spiritually healthy, any iota of evil disturbs us. We're just tremendously sensitive to that, and we reject it altogether. Now, if that is true for the highest of the levels, the tzaddikim, the righteous, then the opposite is true for the lowest of the levels. The wicked person, on the other hand, is a person who has become comfortable with wrongdoings to the point that it doesn't bother him. He's not sensitive to them anymore. It's almost like the Talmud says that if a person repeats a sin time and time again, na'aseh lo keheter, it becomes permissible in that person's eyes. Because again, he's made himself comfortable with that type of behavior. So that is the latest idea. I think let's continue here at the bottom of page 272, right? That's where we were.
Correct.
Okay, so let's continue. Does anyone want to read? Anyone?
Nobody else?
Margot, I guess.
Right, I'll take it. Okay. The highest level of Rasha, to whom is good, which the author describes here, is no ordinary individual. Indeed, such a Rasha would nowadays probably be considered tzaddik. Yet, if he but once transgressed the divine will, on however slight a matter, and he has not yet repented and rectified it absolutely, he is, at that moment, in the category of a Rasha to whom is good.
Right.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, continue, and then continue maybe just those 2 more small paragraphs.
Okay. Or in speech alone, in an utterance that borders on slander or cauticity and the like. His transgression might have been in speech. He has not spoken words of actual slander, lashon hara, which is the most severe prohibition, but also avak lashon hara, literally the dust of slander, words from which one might infer something derogatory about someone else.
Right. So Yeri introduces yet another idea, and the example of lashon hara is an example alone, but very often we can't define ourselves or even try to define theoretically others by saying that they are the incomplete Rasha. They are Rasha to whom there is good, or to whom there is bad, or this guy's a Beinoni, because that connection is, that definition is a definition that doesn't reflect the actual state of the person as he or she is now. Or in other words, a person can only be defined by that which he or she is doing at this very moment. So if right now I'm doing a mitzvah, I'm completely righteous. If right now I'm doing a navera or a sin, then I'm completely wicked. If I'm doing the avera half-heartedly, then I'm a rasha to whom there is bad. If I'm doing a mitzvah wholeheartedly, then I'm an incomplete tzaddik. That depends on what we're doing right now. There are 2 different types of definitions, right? And that's what we're speaking about here. There's a definition that's very general, but then practically speaking, those definitions can only apply to the moment. If right now I'm doing that which I'm supposed to be doing, then I'm completely tzaddik. By the way, he hinted to that, the author of Tanya hinted to that in chapter 1, that it depends what you're doing right now. And for example, right now, we're all studying the Tanya. So right now, you can tap yourselves on your shoulders because you're all tzaddikim. You're all studying Torah. And this is true not just in action, but again, as he's saying here, in speech or in thought. We're not always engaged in action. It's impossible for a human being to always be engaged in action. But we are sometimes engaged in speech instead of action. And sometimes we're not even engaged in speech. There's no one to talk to. So we're engaged in thought. Thought exists 24/7. So again, that notion goes back. It doesn't have to be in action. But if right now I'm speaking and I'm speaking words of slander, then at that moment, I'm wicked. If I'm speaking words of positivity of Torah, for example, then right now I'm tzaddik. I'm a tzaddik. And same with thought. If I'm in my bedroom alone, I'm just thinking. If these are thoughts of purity and these are thoughts of goodness, then those thoughts are turning me into a tzaddik. And the opposite is true. So it really depends not just on, I mean, we're not just trying to define these 5 categories generally, but the best definition of those 5 categories are the way they are judging the moment itself. If the moment is a holy one, whether again in action, in speech, or in thought, then the person becomes a tzaddik. And dare I say that what turns a person into a tzaddik all the time, or at least a Beinoni, which is the goal of the Tanya here, is that the person has more and more moments of holiness, of goodness throughout the day, whether again, in speech, thought, or action. Doesn't matter, but we have more and more. In a way, it's interesting because again, we're in this month of Elul in which we have to inspect ourselves and really rectify that which needs to be rectified. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to doing exactly what the Tanya says here. And that is to ask ourselves, okay, we know how our average day looks like. Okay, our average day, whether it's a Sunday or a work day, we know more or less how that looks like. And then the second question, then the question, that has to follow that thought, now that I know how my day looks like, we should ask ourselves, how many hours of the day are spent in holiness? How many minutes of the day, if you want to go to the very details of the day, how many minutes of the day are spent in holiness? And how many minutes of the day are spent in mundane affairs, or maybe even worse? And maybe then the resolution we should take upon ourselves, especially during this month of Elul, is to say, well, I figured that I only had 4 hours of holiness a day, or 2 hours of holiness a day. Maybe I can increase that a little bit. Maybe I can be a tzaddik not just for 2 hours a day, but for 3 hours a day, for 4 hours a day. And I think that's the goal, to always increase those hours of holiness and of goodness, again, in all 3 realms, in action, in speech, and in thought. And that's what this is saying
Rabbi,
here. Yes, please.
Rabbi, I would just make a comment that
Please.
You cannot judge a person by an action. You judge if it's a good action or a bad action, or a tzaddik or a rasha. You judge a person by a pattern of behavior over time.
Right. No, and that's an excellent point. Right. That's why we need both. That's why we need both definitions. There's a definition of the now. What am I doing right now? But again, how many moments as we are having right now of studying Torah do we have a day, for example? How does the general pattern look like? And that's the second definition, right? I think that's what you're saying, right, William? That yes. It's not just what I'm doing right now, because then it's easy. Okay, I'm a changed person because right now I'm giving tzedakah. Okay, fine. But again, how many hours of the day do you do that? What is your pattern of behavior altogether? And that's why we need that other definition too. Absolutely. No, well pointed out. And again, they say that practice makes perfect. And in a way, practice of good deeds eventually leads us to that general definition of tzaddik, or Beinoni at least. But it takes a lot of consistency. It takes a very strong focus and dedication to goodness, and takes consistency more than anything else. Right. Good point.
But Rabbi?
Yes, please, Jordan. Yeah.
I totally agree. I would just say, though, that the pattern of behavior starts somewhere.
Right.
It starts with that first act.
Right.
And so not to minimize the the
Right.
fact that someone does something once, because that in fact may spur them to the pattern that we're looking for as our goal.
Right. Very, very good. Right. Yeah, exactly. And again, that's both definitions that are so crucial. So if a person says, well, my pattern of behavior is so destructive thus far, I'm doomed, right? Which some people say, then we go to Jordan and we say, you're right. It starts somewhere. So then start now. Change it right now. Reminds me almost of the verse, and if I've mentioned it before, but it's a powerful verse in the book of Psalms of King David that says that that just as east is far from west, so too God has distant our sins from us. Now, how far is east from west? Infinite. 5 kilometers, 5,000 kilometers. How far is east from west? And east from west is as far as the turning of the neck. Right now I'm facing east. Right now I'm facing west. It's just the turn of the neck. So we tell the person, okay, you have a bad pattern right now, just turn. Go 180 degrees, turn your neck around. Start there. Start looking elsewhere. Start looking west, start looking towards God. And or east, depending on where you are. But take that turn. That's that moment that is so precious and important. But then we have to make sure that, again, that look towards God is consistent. If it happens for one moment, okay, great thing happened during one moment, but nothing will change if it doesn't become consistent. And that's when that second definition, William's definition, comes about.
Some people have problems turning their necks.
That's why we call the stiff-necked people.
So the time spent in action, the time spent in speech, and the time spent in thought are all equal
So
when you're doing like for good.
yes, I mean, we've mentioned this before, that of course the most important is deed, right?
Right.
I can be thinking good all day long, but at the end of the
Right.
day, if I don't do good, if those thoughts don't translate into action, then they're not worth much. For my state of being, yes, it's better to think of good things than of bad things, because in a way it defines my mind, it defines who I am, right? My status, as we're speaking about. But again, the most important is to translate those into action, sorry, because otherwise those thoughts really are almost not worth anything. That's a good point. Yeah, so even in those three realms, we have to work, of course, on ensuring that they're always good. But even when we now go deeper and we go to those three realms, the realm that should really be the most our greatest focus is the realm of action. If we had to divide into percentages, I would say that it's not enough to have 33, 33, and 33. 33% of thought, 33% of speech, and 33% of good action. Maybe the opposite. Maybe we should have 10, 10, and 80. 10% of thought, 10% of speech, and most important is deed. Or as the Ethics of Our Father says, that Lo midrash ikar ela maaseh, in the name of Rabbi Shimon, in the first chapter, that it's not the speech that counts most, it's the deed that counts most. Maaseh wa ikar, as the Lubavitch Rebbe would say so often. And Maimonides himself says that if you really want to change yourself, change your actions, because your actions will make you who you are. Or in his words, deed is what changes the heart. It's not the heart that changes the deed. You can't wait to feel good, to feel inspired in order to do good. Maimonides says, do good, and you'll see that your heart will change. Then you'll become inspired. And so if we had to allocate, again, percentages, I would say 10% good thought, 10% good speech, and 80% good action. Maybe we can give thought and speech a little more percentages sometimes. But yeah, you're right. In those three realms, it's action that takes over. You know, yes, Jordan, please.
Just a quick comment, since we're talking about Lashon Hara, that I read this morning that today is the yurtzeit of the Chofetz Chaim, who was the rabbi who well, what would be the word? Codified what constitutes Lashon Hara, and
right.
wrote volumes about that.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, I have his book, I think, in shul. I would show it to everybody. But you're right. The Chafetz Chaim, I didn't know it was his yahrzeit today, so thank you for pointing that out. The Chafetz Chaim, or his name was Rabbi Yisrael Kogan. He was really one of the great luminaries of the early 1900s, who was known by his name of his book, the Chafetz Chaim, like you just pointed out, which comes from another verse in the book of Psalms. I think it's in chapter 36 or 37, 36 maybe, that says, Mi ha'ish chafetz chaim, that name. Mi ha'ish chafetz chaim ohev yamim lirot tov, netzor leshoncha mera u'sfatecha midaber migma. Who is the person? This is what King David says, who desires life, chafetz chaim, and that was his nickname because he's named his book. He named his book that speaks about being so cautious with our speech. Who desires life? Who is the person that desires life? Chafetz chaim, who wants to ohev yamim lirot tov, who loves his days in order to see good. Who is that type of person? If you can preserve your tongue from speaking bad and your lips from speaking words of trickery or maybe of slander. And that's why he named his book the Chafetz Chaim, based on this verse, that this is the recipe, so to speak, to a good life, to a lengthy life, to speak only words that are good, not words that are bad. And the Chafetz Chaim really gave us, maybe it was the first one in Jewish history that gave us almost a code of Jewish law that pertains only to that. He begins, it's frightening actually. It begins with enumerating all of the different, in that book begins with enumerating all of the different sins that a person commits just by slander. I think there's a total of 14 of them. And then, of course, he analyzes what slander can do and the destruction it brings to this world. Of course, the lesson from that is also the opposite. What good speech can do to this world. You never know. One good word can, how one good word can change a life. On the other hand, how one bad word can destroy life. In fact, the Talmud equates Lashon Hara, slander that we're speaking about here, to murder. And it says that when a person takes out a knife, a sword, a gun, nowadays, and kills a person, then you're only killing that person physically, because that neshama continues to live on. But when you slander, you're killing a person spiritually, killing his good name. You're killing not just a body, you're not killing a body, but you're murdering a soul. And that's why in many ways it's even worse. On a spiritual level, of course, maybe not on practical, but on a spiritual level. That's how serious the sin is of Lashon Hara, of slander, of gossip. There's different types. Here we're speaking about, Rabbi Stans went into the two types. There's actual slander and there's what's called avak Lashon Hara, which is the dust of slander. That means that you're not saying necessarily something bad, but you're hinting to the bad. So, for example, if someone asks me, hey, what do you think about Shimon? And I don't say Shimon is a bad guy or whatever. I don't slander. I just say, for example, that I have my reservations about Shimon, and I don't go into details. That's avak Lashon Hara. That's dust of slander. Of course, there are exceptions, right? If someone is asking me about, I'm about to do a business deal with Shimon, and I have to save him from that business deal because I know that Shimon is a crook, then I have to tell him. So there's all sorts of exceptions, and that's, in a way, what this book also goes into, the Chafetz Chaim book goes into. But just to say it, just because I feel like saying it, that's wrong. Anyway, so that's how severe the sin is. I will add that one of my favorite quotes, not from the Jewish world, but from Eleanor Roosevelt, I think it was, who said that small minds speak about people, average minds speak about events, and great minds speak about ideas. I think people who speak about people all the time just reflects the small mind that they have. If you want to be great minds in life, and maybe we shouldn't engage in slander or in gossip, because we speak about ideas and speak about people. I know that nowadays everything is allowed. You go on Facebook, you go on Instagram, everyone's talking about everybody. You join a conversation on a bench in the park or wherever it may be, and everyone's talking about people. And that's the new thing. You open up the TV and you see channels, everyone's talking about people. And I think that reflects the small mind of society altogether. If we really want to elevate society, let's start talking about ideas that can truly be good and can transform, therefore, the world altogether. But that's another aspect of it. Anyway, but you're right. So that's what slander does. And you see Hashgacha Pratis, as we say, divine providence, that we're speaking about this here in the Tanya when it's the yahrzeit of Rabbi Yisrael Kogan. Rabbi Yisrael Kogan also is known not just for his book of Lashon Hara, but Chafetz Chaim was also known to stand up against some of the harshest decrees in Poland, in Russia, against the Jewish people. You know, there was the era of communism that wasn't friendly, to say the least, to Jews. And he fought against it to protect the Jews, the Jewish community, from the right to slaughter animals, to have kosher meat, for example, to even the right to give our children Jewish education when the communists wanted to impose their own ways of education on all children. And he was quite successful. But this should show you that the type of person he is, and I know we'll continue, but it's something we can learn from, and that's why it's worth mentioning, especially on his day of his yahrzeit. But the Chafetz Chaim once sent a delegation to the Polish government to try and cancel a decree. And he sent a delegation of elder Jews, you know, some of his peers who didn't speak Polish quite well. They spoke Yiddish more than they spoke Polish. But in any case, they went and they presented the case, and they weren't listened to. The case fell on deaf ears. They came back to the Chafetz Chaim and they said to him, look, we weren't successful, unfortunately. Our Polish was not good, and they didn't have much patience, and so on and so forth. And the Chafetz Chaim says, you can explain whatever you want to explain, but there's one thing I don't understand. How come none of you fainted? If you had fainted, I promise you the decree would have been annulled. Why would the Chafetz Chaim say such a thing? Because this was the type of person he was. He took things to heart. His love for his fellow, to annul these decrees, was so penetrating that he would have fainted. It would have hurt him so much that he would have fainted. But these people, they were just, checking boxes maybe. They didn't take it to heart so deeply, or at least as deeply as the Chafetz Chaim would have taken to heart. And therefore, no one fainted. And therefore, the decree wasn't canceled. So why did no one faint? Why can't you have such a level of love, of care for your people? This is who the Chafetz Chaim was. He really cared for his people, and therefore he cared so much that these people treat each other with respect and with dignity, especially when it comes to speech. And that's something that no doubt we should take upon ourselves too on his yahrzeit, to be a little more careful about how we love and how we care, and maybe to love a little more profoundly and to care a little more profoundly. And then no doubt then the bad speech won't even exist, because I love so much.